The United States and Iran have begun their second round of nuclear negotiations in Rome. Now, these are some of the images of the Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani meeting with his Iranian counterpart Abbas Araghchi. The Iranian state television reported that the Oman-mediated talks in Rome began at around 3 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So as the second round of nuclear talks takes shape, the latest report suggests that Israel is still considering to attack Iran's nuclear facilities in the coming months. Now, the American President Donald Trump has reportedly advised the state of Israel against any such attacks on Iran. Recently, the US president announced Washington's effort to carry on with the nuclear talks with Iran when Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu was present at the White House. The Israeli officials have vowed to prevent Tehran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and Netanyahu has insisted that any negotiation with Iran must lead to the complete dismantling of its nuclear program. Now, quoting the Israeli sources, Reuters says that Israel has proposed to the Trump administration a series of options to attack Iran's nuclear facilities, including some with late spring and summer timelines. The plans include a combination of air bombings and also commando operations that vary in severity, and that could set back Tehran's ability to weaponize its nuclear program. The Western nations have long accused Iran of seeking to acquire a nuclear weapon, an allegation that Tehran has consistently and outrightly denied, insisting that its nuclear program is actually meant for peaceful civilian purpose of generating electricity. Now, experts say that it is unlikely that the United States and Iran will reach an agreement this week.
Chances of reaching an agreement, because both sides want to reach an agreement, is more than not wanting to reach an agreement. But there are serious issues over which compromise has to come about. And there's not much ground that the Iranians have except for saying that, look, we want some kind of an enrichment program. We don't want to.
Now, the US-Iran meeting comes a week after the two sides conducted what Iran has called indirect talks in Muscat last Saturday. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said that Tehran had observed a degree of seriousness from the US during the first round, even as he questioned Washington's intentions. The Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has stated his red lines to reach a nuclear deal, saying that dismantling uranium centrifuges is completely off limits. Now, the IAEA chief who recently visited Iran has warned that Tehran is dangerously close to having a nuclear weapon. According to the latest International Atomic Energy Agency report, Iran has an estimated 274.8 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity, nearing the weapon's grade of nearly 90% purity that is needed to make a nuclear weapon. The US Secretary of State has said that Washington is waiting on the findings of IAEA's Tehran trip. Washington has spoken to its European counterparts to make a prompt decision on reimposing sanctions on Iran. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is happening in these negotiations between the United States and Iran, we're joined by Professor Scott Lucas, who is a professor of international politics at the Clinton University College in Dublin. Professor Lucas, thank you very much indeed for joining us here on WION. Now, the talks we are given to understand are currently underway between Iran and the United States of America. But what is interesting is in the manner in which reports are coming about as to how Israel still insists that there should be attack on Iran's nuclear facilities. As far as Israel is concerned, it appears that these talks are just a sideshow and it is more interested in the military option. What's your assessment of this?
Well, the talks in Rome, the second round between the U.S. and Iran, have just finished. They did so in the last few minutes after more than 4 hours today.
Right.
And we await details of any advance. But meanwhile, you are right that Israeli officials have effectively leaked to outlets, including Reuters, including other media, that they still have plans on the table for what they call a limited attack on Iranian nuclear facilities. Now, the context for this is that earlier this month, the Israelis proposed to the Trump administration that the attack proceed, as you mentioned, using a combination of commando operations on the ground and bombing from the air. Donald Trump, after heated debate within his administration, said no, he wanted to give the diplomatic route a chance. He invited Benjamin Netanyahu to Washington, and significantly, as Netanyahu sat next to Trump in the White House, in the Oval Office, Trump announced that the talks would go ahead with Iran. So that was almost like a public slapping down of Netanyahu that, no, we're not going to support the bombing, we're going to proceed. What you're seeing this weekend is that Israel is pushing back and saying, look, the Americans aren't going to have it all their own way in terms of these talks. We can go ahead with a military attack if we want to without American support. And they're sort of putting the ball back into the Trump administration's court for two reasons. One is, are you insisting that we cannot attack Iran? And two, if these talks fail, and the Israelis hope they do, then the military option is back on the table.
You know, the details of what's in fact transpired in the second round of the negotiations, these details are yet to come out, but the talks, as you just pointed out, are indeed over. But here is the crux of the matter. While these talks go on, a lot of speculation is on about, how the United States would want to proceed from here. Because for now, though, Donald Trump has said that he wants to give negotiations a chance. But the question, of course, is this. Do you think in the future, if Israel were to carry out some kind of a unilateral attack, he would then prevail upon the Americans to also join in?
Well, that's a great question, because you might remember that if we take the parallel case of Gaza, that Trump put pressure on the Israelis to agree a phase one of the ceasefire with Gaza. But when the Israelis decided not to proceed with phase two and instead renewed the attacks on Gaza, they got full support from the Trump administration. So I think they may be making the same gamble here. I don't think they'll attack while the talks are going on. But as soon as the talks run into trouble, then I think the Israelis could attack and expect the U.S. simply to follow. Now, here's the big question. Will the talks run into trouble? And the issue here is that the Trump administration is very muddled on what it says must happen. At one point, their envoy, or Donald Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, said, Iran can still keep an enrichment program. They can still have some uranium for civilian purposes. Within a couple of days, in fact, within 12 hours, the White House pushed back and said, no nuclear program at all for Iran. And as you've mentioned, that's a red line. The Supreme Leader will not insist a total ban on Iran's nuclear program. So I think the Israelis are counting on the Trump administration not being very clear what they want out of the Iranians, and that these talks will fall apart because of that lack of clarity.
I think lack of clarity is what perhaps defines the objective with which the Americans have entered into these talks. But after, of course, wait and watch as to what, of course, is transparent and what comes through of these talks that have just concluded in Rome. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Lucas, for joining us with all that perspective there.
Thank you.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.